Hi everyone, this is Andrew Sheehan. I decided to research bullying, gangs, and violence. Going to school in the city of Springfield was one reason why I chose this topic. The local schools have many issues regarding the presence of bullying, gangs, and violence, so I was interested to gain some more insight about it. The gang violence has affected us all, with the numerous incidents of AIC being caught in the middle of a gang war. The schools I went to back home on Long Island didn't have too many issues with gangs and violence. There were fights that broke out, but nothing too extreme. However, we were all affected by the death of one of the stars on our girls' soccer team. She had committed suicide because of cyberbullying. That tragedy really made me want to learn more about bullying and the impact it has on the victim itself. Another reason why I chose this topic is because my sister is a speech teacher in an urban school in the Bronx. The school has a lot of violence and gang activity. I too may end up working in New York City as a teacher, so it is important to have a deep understanding of the issues surrounding bullying, gangs, and violence, how to properly intervene in situations that may arise, the impact it has on student achievement, and what I can do to make the school I am working in a safer place and more conducive to learning. I had 7 sources for this research project. The first book I used was Classroom Discipline and Management by Clifford H. Edwards. This book gave some good information about bullying, gangs, and violence. It also had some good intervention strategies that could be used. The second book I used was Gangs, Trouble in the Streets by Marilyn Tower Oliver. Marilyn was a teacher in Los Angeles and worked in a school that was infested with gang members. Therefore, she has a lot of experience with dealing with gang members and being in an environment where gangs are present and where violence is present. Therefore, that's what inspired her to write this book. And what I liked about this book is that it really broke down what exactly gangs are. It also broke down the lore of gangs, like the reasons why people join gangs. And it also had some good intervention strategies of how to break the cycle of violence within a school district or a community. The next source I used was Victories Over Violence, The Quest for Safe Schools and Communities, written by Martin L. Mitchell and Larry K. Brentrow. I actually found this source through the AIC database on Academic Search Premier. This source really talked about the impact of mass school shootings, like the effect it has on schools, communities, individuals. It really talks about how someone gets to the point of being that violent. It talks about how peer victimization breeds violence, and it talks about the stages of a violent person, from before they commit the act of violence to after they do it. The next source I used was a book titled "Kids Killing Kids: Managing Violence and Gangs in Schools." It was written by Thomas K. Capozzoli and R. Steve McVeigh. I wasn't able to get a hard copy of this book. However, I was able to get a good portion of the book online. I wasn't able to get all of it. However, what I was provided with was definitely adequate. This was a good source because it had, similar to Victories Over Violence, it had a lot of cases of violence in schools, the after effects of school violence, causes of school violence. And also had some good strategies for reducing and preventing school violence. The next source I used was Violence in Schools: Prevalence, Prediction, and Prevention. This was written by Kristen D. Eisenbraun. I like this source because it had some good statistics about violence, like on a national scale. It talked about the evolution of violence, and it really had some good intervention strategies when it comes to violence. And this was very in depth. It literally broke down step by step what should be done to intervene when intervening with violence and when you're trying to prevent it. It literally will tell you how to form committees, who should be involved, what you should say and do. It was just a great source. The next source I used was titled Bullying in American Schools. It was part 2 of an article written 1 year after the incident at Sandy Hook, and it was written by Dr. Steve Parise. This source was it was pretty basic. However, it was pretty informative. It broke down what exactly safe schools are, what bullying is, who gets bullied, and the statistics when it comes to bullying. Those were pretty interesting, and it really just it talked about the impact of bullying. Like I said, it was a short article, but it really was informative, and it was pretty easy to follow. And the last source I used was titled Are There Gangs in Schools? And this was from the article in the Journal of School Violence. It had numerous authors. This really just dealt with gangs in schools, talked about the characteristics of gangs, the impact of gangs on schools, why gangs develop and what attracts students, like what students are susceptible to joining gangs, and school responses to gangs, along with effective interactions for combating school gangs. So right now I will give you a little bit of information regarding what I have researched. So first off, I'll talk about bullying. Bullying has several definitions. It is the act of singling out a victim and engaging in behaviors intended to ridicule, harass, or otherwise harm that target. It can also be defined as unacknowledged crime of violence, with adults generally being unaware of its prevalence. I found that in the Classroom Discipline and Management book written by Edwards. Bullying is often described as repeated and intentional acts of verbal or physical harm by a person in power. I found that from the Sandy Hook article. Despite the numerous definitions, bullying is pretty clear when you are in the presence of it. Bullying can be physical, verbal, or social. Physical is pretty obvious. That would be things that cause physical harm to another person, such as punching, pushing, kicking, any of those things. Teasing, belittling, ridiculing would be known as verbal bullying. Quite simply, saying mean things to make someone feel bad is verbal bullying. And social bullying is something that usually takes place on the internet. It's basically cyberbullying. It is intended to embarrass or socially isolate the victim. Social bullying can also be called relational bullying. Victims of bullying are often left with physical harm, emotional distress, and social embarrassment. The bully themselves is often left with feelings of prestige among their peers or power over their victim. Let's see. So, the next thing I will talk about is school violence. School violence is, one moment here. School violence can be defined as any act of intimidation, threats, harassment, robbery, vandalism, physical assault such as fights, with or without a weapon, or murder that happens on school grounds or buses going to and from school. Now, there's a statistic that I found in the book Kids Killing Kids that was very surprising. In the years 1996 and 1997, there are about 190,000 incidents of physical attacks or fights without a weapon, and about 11,000 incidents of physical attacks or fights where a weapon was used. In the United States, there's over 100,000 children carrying weapons to school, and 40 children are killed or injured by guns, according to the United States Department of Justice. I also found, which was very important, regarding urban schools, that the rate of urban students being killed on or near campus is 9 times higher than in small towns or rural communities. Let's see. The setting of a school plays a major role in violence. The size of the school, the location of the school, the actual physical condition of the school, the ethnic distribution, and the policies that the school implement play a huge role in the amount and the severity of violence in a school. The National Center for Educational Statistics found that compared to smaller schools, larger schools are more prone to acts of violence committed by their students. It was also found that the physical conditions have an influence on students' behavior, attitudes, and motivation. So schools that have problems with their temperature, such as schools that are overly hot, or schools that have problems with graffiti, or schools that are in need of repairs, run the risk of actually promoting more violence. This is probably due to the fact that their students are unhappy and don't feel that they're in a safe environment. It was also found that while many people would think having a lot of law enforcement in school would prevent violence, that's not necessarily true. A lot of times, this makes students view their teachers as less of authority figures. And when they are not around police, they're more likely to actually act out. And the use of strip searches and bag checking in schools can actually be emotionally damaging to students. The students can feel embarrassed and develop aggression towards authority figure. So it actually may cause them to begin displaying more defiant behavior. It actually will do the opposite of what was intended. The next and last thing I'm going to talk about here are gangs. Gangs are groups that are motivated by violence and illegal activities that range from defacing property and fighting to drug and weapon trafficking to murder. One definition states that gangs must meet 3 criteria. Members must recognize themselves as a distinct group, the community must recognize the gang as a group, and the gang must involve itself in enough illegal activities to get a consistent negative response from the community and law enforcement. I actually found that in the book Gangs, Trouble in the Streets. I also learned how gangs attract people. Gangs are able to attract people that usually don't do too well in school. They don't feel safe in their neighborhood. They come from abusive homes. They don't have a lot of friends, or they've been impacted by racial stereotypes. A lot of kids truly believe that they're destined to fail because that's what they've been told their whole life.